welcome to Soccer Made in Portland on the North American Soccer Network. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Hopefully you're getting some audio from this. If not, we know we're recording the audio. We know Trevor's recording the video, and so you will see us and hear us eventually, if not now. Obviously, I'm Mao speaking. You know Kelly McLean to my left, and you also know to my right, John Strong, voice of the Portland Timbers. He was kind enough to join us today. Thank you, John. How are you doing?
It's good to be here. I'm the one with the shiny forehead, but
you're also
happy to be here on.
I think the only person in Portland with a natural tan at this point. A few people with some unnatural tans.
Slighted as it is. Yeah, Jack Jewsbury said, I can tell you about your honeymoon. He said, because we look like ghosts. And I said, give me 3 days. I'll be back.
Well, we are happy to have John back, just in Portland, and then be here on the show. We were kind of chatting yesterday, and thought he would be a good guest to have on to talk a little bit about the beginning of Timbers training camp, such as it is at this point, today being the second day. Hopefully, you can see behind us, there's a little bit of action going on, not too much, just a little bit of drills here on the second day of training. Just a couple of quick notes. As always, I'll skip through them quickly as we're on a shortened time frame. This is on the North American Soccer Network, so NASN.TV is the place to go for all of our archive shows, for any of the other great shows on this network. Of course, iTunes is another place you can find any of our podcasts, audio or video, if they exist. Apologies again for last week's audio only. And email address soccer.portland@gmail.com, and we're on Twitter, SoccerMadeInPDX. Very, very quickly, this day in history, January 24th, 2011, not so long ago, the Timbers' first ever MLS training. Obviously, the calendar difference made it 23rd. This year was the 24th. Last year, and just a quick reminder of a couple names that were here last year this time, Tony McManus, Josh Cameron, Cuevas Kirk, Doug DeMartin were all guys who were at training camp. And as we know, obviously didn't ultimately make the team, so I'm not sure what that says about the supplemental draft picks.
Timbers, where are they now kind of a thing, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a number of guys out there today and probably going through a little bit into the trip to California who are going to have a lot of work to do to make this particular roster. But since you're here, let's ask you a couple of questions instead of just me talking. I guess the first question is just what... You were gone for a couple of weeks. What is sort of the biggest thing to you coming back? What's the biggest difference in what the team looks like roster-wise compared to when you left?
Yeah, if I'm being honest, I think the thing that I was most shocked by, even though I maybe didn't need to be shocked, was the Kenny Cooper trade. That was the one thing where the one day I actually just kind of checked my phone because I had a few minutes to kill, and it was the day of the draft. I'm like, well, let's see what's going on. What? From a soccer perspective, I think it does make sense. They not just necessarily from a needing more goals perspective. He had the slump. He finished the season better. But I think also, too, the comments that Gavin and John Spencer made, if we need a true number 9, need a big center forward who's going to hold the ball up, who's going to be physical. I can't tell you how many times that I heard coaches say post-game, we just need someone to hold the ball up for 5 seconds so we can get everyone up the field. And so that makes sense. I'll admit to being very conflicted by it. I liked Kenny a lot. It's a challenge for someone in my position because we get to know these guys. We still have to be objective when we cover them. And Kenny was a guy that I got along really well with. I loved interviewing him. I loved chatting with him. He got married the same day as I did, actually. And so throughout the season, we were kind of comparing notes on, did you do this? Have you sent your invitations out? Stuff like that. And it was hard. I really wanted to see him succeed. I really wanted to see him come back, get a second chance, and do better. But I also know that, it's a results business, that if you're not doing what the team wants, say with me, as I drop my mic, if I'm not doing what the team wants me to do, I'm out of here too. That's just how these things work. But that was, I think, the biggest thing I came back and go, wow, that did not necessarily expect it to happen when it did, and it's certainly a big change.
Is there anyone on the current roster that you think can provide that kind of service or holding the ball up, or are they going to have to find? We've heard rumors, or not even rumors, Gavin just straight out come and say, we're looking for a designated player who will score 12 to 16 goals, who will be more of a number 9. But, can you see a guy like Eddie Johnson or Bright DK or somebody doing that in lieu of a designated player coming in?
Yeah, the search definitely continues. They're trying to find a big-time goal scorer. It's what they want to get. I think it's possible. I would suggest Eddie Johnson is the more likely of the two than DK. I think DK was a little rougher, as we saw. And a lot of it is because he lost 6-7 months with his Achilles injury and getting back fit. Eddie Johnson was, I don't want to say tragic at sports, but it was the most disappointing storyline of last year that he really started to show well, and he scored a great goal against Toronto. We were kind of thinking, okay, in that kind of 4-3-3, 4-5-1 hybrid, he can kind of do that. And then he takes a ball to the side of the head against L.A. Andre Hainaut, whether he intends to or not, has got his arms up a couple times in Houston, and Eddie's done for the year. I think Eddie, and I want to chat with him at some point this week about this, I think he's confident that he can be that. I know at the end of last season he was frustrated that it happened because he felt he was hitting his peak. He would be the likeliest person on the current roster to be able to fill that role. But I definitely get the sense that, and why wouldn't you? The search for, a big-time goal scorer, someone that can be the anchor of the front line continues.
Now, Michael mentioned sort of last year at this time when camp started, all the faces that were in camp. Does it seem, yesterday, this year, that there's fewer people, or that there's just more signed guys? Does it seem less chaotic to you?
That's a wonderful way of phrasing it. Exactly. I was thinking of that. Of just it seemed like this glut of guys, and it was a weird mix of expansion draft pickups, other MLS type guys, holdovers from the previous year, and it was a giant threw a bunch of ingredients into a pot and kind of see what comes out of it. This seems a little more organized. I have to say, I've seen a couple published reports that describe this as being an overhauled roster. There's new faces, but it's pretty much all the same guys. And so, it feels a lot more familiar. It feels like the same team with a couple fresh faces, a little bit more depth, and your normal group of, draft picks and rookies, things like that, come out to kind of really start the process. Not like last year where the first couple weeks we're just figuring out everything. This is more so of, okay, from this point on, 7 weeks of pregame practice ahead of the opener March 12th.
Yeah, it is worth remembering that, for example, neither Steve Purdy nor Aiden Brown were signed at the beginning of training camp last year. Obviously they were, but at the time we didn't necessarily know that they were any different than Doug DeMartin. They were guys who were just here from last year. Are they going to stay? We don't know. And the coaching staff may have had a better idea, but they hadn't actually been signed. Along the broadcasting lines, do you know yet, is Robbie Earl going to be back as your partner next year? Is that an ongoing thing? Do you have any idea? I'm not basing this on anything. I'm just curious.
I have to be careful. It's not my place to make certain announcements or pronouncements, one thing and the other. What I can say is this. I loved working with Robbie. Why wouldn't I? He made my job easy, and he and I became friends. He actually came up for my wedding, which was great to see him. And he loved it too. I think he enjoyed his time. I think what he said was he loved the idea after a decade's worth of being kind of a network broadcaster in England. He loved being a part of a club again and riding the ups and downs and being there week in, week out. He really, really enjoyed that. Again, it's not my place to say one thing or the other. What I would say is there is nothing that I've seen to suggest otherwise from he and I being back. I guess on the radio for March 12th, and then the TV for Dallas the following week, and I would be very, very hopeful of hopefully a long-term partnership with him. It was really great.
You could definitely tell. Everybody's seen the Darlington Nagbe goal a million times, and I think at this time of year, people's watching it even more just to try to get excited again about the season. But you can hear it in his voice. Obviously you can hear it in your voice first, but then after that, his comments are like, I've been saying he needed to do. You can see that or hear that investment in, the team, and that's a cool thing to have, especially for such a big name. To be here in Portland.
And that's, I think, a good point. I know that there's there's a trend and a concern of foreign broadcasters being parachuted in, and okay, how much do they really care? Are they just kind of mercenary hired hands? And I'll admit to having the same concern myself. When I first met Robbie last year, I was like, I don't know. He's big time. He's coming into the Portland Timbers. He bought in completely from day one. I was really impressed with that. He took it seriously. The amount of hard work they did, the research, the conversations he had, and as much as he really genuinely cared, while still, you have to have some sense of objectivity, and he did. But no, he bought it, and I love that, and it made it so much fun. And you can hear it a number of times. I even remember the New York home game. There was the sequence where they scored 3 goals to go up 3-1, and you could hear it in his voice of just like this joy of, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So it was great fun.
Now, along those lines, the new TV deal with NBC Sports, they hire Arlo White. There was a lot of talk about who they might get. A lot of people wanted to see Arlo go and do that because a lot of people, have respect for him and like what he does and thinks he does a really good job. Seattle comes back and hires another foreign broadcaster, although they do bring Casey Keller into the booth with him, right? What are your thoughts on that issue of bringing in the foreign broadcasters into the MLS booths.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I think it's a worthwhile topic of conversation. I think it affects the growth of the American sport. Had you asked me a year and a half ago, I would have been very against it. When Arlo White was first hired by the Sounders, I said on my radio show, I think it's bad. I think it's counterproductive to just reinforce the idea that only British voices know what they're talking about. And what does that say to me as a young American broadcaster? My opinion has changed. Part of it is I like Arlo a lot. He and I became good friends. He's a great guy. And I do think he's the best play-by-play broadcaster that we have. I would put he and JP Dellacamera as the top, and the rest of us just fighting for third place. I think he was the right choice for that. And I think what it comes down to is, for the most part, I think a lot of these guys that are English that are coming in, I think they're better than us. They have more experience. I mean, and this is not meant to be a knock, most of the American play-by-play broadcasters across MLS, they're guys that came up in other sports, hockey, football, whatever it is. And they kind of got into soccer later. And this is a weird sport. It's entirely different. That's what we noticed with our producer, our director, and with me as well. We all had to unlearn everything we had learned broadcasting other sports and learning the way you're supposed to do it. And so I think for now, yeah, it's just because, they're better, and Arlo's fantastic. And I don't know a lot about Ross Fletcher. I'm looking forward to meeting him. I'm a big Casey Keller fan. I have been my whole life because I was a goalkeeper. So I think that's a smart hire for them. I think the time will come, and Arlo has said this, that we'll pass them if you want to make it quite so stark. We'll get there. But for now, I think Arlo's the right choice. Seattle obviously felt they wanted to keep continuity. But I'm also, and again, we have an English voice on our broadcast too, but I like that we flipped it play-by-play and color analyst. And, as long as there are more and more young broadcasters who grew up around the sport, who understand the differences, who know that whereas when you're calling a football or a basketball game in soccer, silence is your friend. I think that'll change over time. Is just the progression of the game in general. It's a very long answer, I realize, but it's a subject that I take very seriously. So.
Ultimately this is radio, so talking's good.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what we want. Well, going back onto the field, what do you expect out of? Not so much this week. This week is mostly stretching and running and light ball drills and things. But once the team goes to California, I guess, first of all, are you going to go to California at all? And then what do you expect to see kind of developing? Is there a formation that you think they might lean towards now that Cooper's out of the equation? Or you think it's all up in the air at this point?
I think it's up in the air. I'm not a big preseason guy just because I kind of want to get on the real thing, but it's important obviously, and the trick is to not get too caught up in the results and look more at the thing forming up. You got the sense with the comments after the Cooper trade, they still want to have more or less the same style we saw last year. They want a guy that can hold up the ball, someone that can run off him, quality from the wings, overlapping fullbacks. Make sure you're strong in the center, even though you're not necessarily needing a classic number 10 playmaker in there. I get the sense that kind of continuity. I think John Spencer's a pragmatic guy. I think he'll fit his style to it, the players that he has. If you recall last year, this time he talked a lot about wanting to have a versatile team that he could switch to a 4-3-3 like that and go with it. And I asked him about midseason. I said, we haven't seen as much of that. He goes, we just don't have the guys that can do that yet. But yeah, I don't expect you'll have any kind of massive changes. One of the big question marks I have, and I was talking with some people yesterday about this, is at the forward position. The idea of Darlington Nagbe, is that his best position is withdrawn forward. Where does Transito fit in? There's other pieces that has a lot to do. I think Nagbe with what happens on the right. How healthy is Sal Zizou coming into the season? Can Khalif Al-Hassan refound the form that he had early last year? So does Nagbe need to be on the right? That's assuming Eric Alexander has the left locked down, which based on his Real Salt Lake performance, perhaps yes, but that was one game. There are so many questions, and these are good questions to have. It's early, that I think have a lot to do with what this team's going to look like down the road. A lot of it comes down to in these preseason games, who can step up and kind of make it clear to the coaching staff, you know what, don't worry about me. This position's fine. I've got it locked down. I'm a consistent, reliable piece here. And then you kind of go from there, I suppose.
To me, it seems like the guys who have the most to gain in the preseason, and particularly with A, Cooper's departure, and B, the general consensus that Transito is not going to be rushed out there necessarily into the starting lineup on March 12th. I mean, if he performs in the preseason and he's one of the best forwards, they might have to, but I don't think they want to. I think they want to bring him along. So to me, that makes it sound like Bright Dike and Eddie Johnson have a lot to prove, because we know Perlaza's kind of going to be in the mix. Nagbe might have to play in the midfield, as you mentioned, just based on either Sal's injury or just general preferences or lack of other options, particularly creatively. So those two guys, while they're not identical, they do sort of bring similar styles that are, different from Perlaza. And I think those two guys, they're going to be fighting basically each other for the right, either to start or at least be the first guy off the bench at the forward position. And that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition between last year, where obviously DK was totally injured, and Johnson got that Achilles injury right before the season and was not an option. I think it's good to have options. I think those guys are both motivated. I mean, we heard that DK lost 12 pounds. Eddie Johnson told me yesterday he lost 12 pounds. They're both fit. They're both ready to go. I think that's nothing but good for the Timbers.
I agree. And I had actually heard 20 for DK. So either way, he's leaned up, whatever it is. No, I agree completely. And it's the thing you get from this team consistently from the coaching staff, they want competition. They don't want guys to feel insecure. They don't want guys to feel like if they make one mistake in the training field, they're going to lose their spot and never get it back. But they like having a lot of good options and seeing who can fight it out and seeing who deserves to get that spot. With Valencia, it's another conversation I had with someone yesterday, and I got to figure out, do we call him Valencia? Do we call him Trencito? What does he want to be referred to as? We'll deal with that eventually. Does he play or not this year? Part of it is, how he develops. I mean, if he's comes out on fire as a young kid, why not have him out there if he can do it? But how he performs or doesn't perform and how the other guys do, that's a lot of the question mark thing. With Eddie Johnson and Bright Dika, I would say with Eddie, firstly, the concussion thing is scary because, Bright Dika comes back from his Achilles injury, and his injured Achilles is healthier than the other one because you rehabbed it. Concussion, it's the reverse. He's more likely to receive one now, let alone the physical side of it mentally. Is he going to be willing to stick his head in there? I think he is. I think he's got that personality, but that becomes the question. With DK, we saw a player who's still a bit raw, a guy who I think was still last year trying to do the things that he did in the USL to score goals, which basically put his head down and run, and you can't quite do that here. The best example of it was at San Jose. This is before he scored his first goal against Kansas City. He gets that breakaway late, and what he's used to doing, just running in a straight line and then just smashing it past the keeper. Instead, you have the defender, I forget who it was, able to cut him off and tackle it away. And what DK needs to learn is that ability to, angle his run to cut off the defender, the ability to have that composure and know where you're finishing and not just smash it. And that'll come. But I would just, my own hunch, put Eddie slightly above Bright just from that standpoint of Eddie a little bit more refined at this point. He's got more professional experience. But I think a bigger injury question over Eddie, unfortunately, because concussions just scare the heck out of me as we go into this season.
This team, the way it is right now, is it a playoff caliber team? Will they make the playoffs?
I'd like to think so. That's a huge cop-out. Here's my take on that. I think they were close last year. I mean, that was a team that was good enough to be a playoff team, minus the mistakes they made, the goals they gave away. Now, that's why you're not a playoff team, but it's not like I hate to say it, Vancouver, Chivas USA just wasn't going to happen. They just weren't good enough. It's going to be harder to make the playoffs this year. A, less teams get in. B, you're fighting with the other Western Conference teams. You're not going to get the benefit of getting a 9 or a 10 spot ahead of weaker Eastern Conference sides. And it's a harder schedule as a result of the conference scheduling. I think they can. I think it's a matter of tightening up things. As we've seen, they can be counted on to overperform at home and beat an LA Galaxy and beat whoever else. Obviously, points on the road and not conceding late goals, 2 points of emphasis. But those aren't impossible to overcome in a given year. And I would say, too, the fact that I like about the schedule is like 9 out of 10 or something like that of the final games are against Western Conference teams. They're going to be given their opportunity. The odds are good. They'll be close enough. And so we will get to August and September, and it's going to be up to them whether they make the playoffs or not. How good are you by that point? And if you're good enough by then, you can get done. And if you're not, you weren't supposed to anyway, which it is an odd way to phrase it. But I do think this team can make the playoffs. I'm going to wait to say if they will. Just, got to see what it looks like when the season begins. But they're not that far away. It doesn't take blowing up the roster. It doesn't take making 20 personnel changes and having an entirely different starting 11 for this team realistically to get in the postseason. Crazy as that may say to be.
Yeah, you don't have to be Toronto, who also didn't make the playoffs after completely blowing up their team. We'll see if they're better this year with a little more stability. What do you think about First Kick, having it here, having it on a Monday night, having it against Philadelphia, which last year was sort of a team you could consider as one that the Timbers were sort of vying for a playoff spot with up until a certain point. Obviously, that's not an option this year because they're a different conference. But do you like that matchup for an opening day game?
I do, actually. It's going to be a tough game. I like Philadelphia. That was a good that's the blueprint, I think, for Portland, to be honest. A team that struggled in year one and was really good in year two. They faded down the stretch a little bit. But that was a good example of what you can do after figuring things out in year one and go be successful. I'm not afraid of playing the tough teams. You're going to have to play them at some point. If you want to get in the players, you're going to have to beat them. So go ahead and do it. And it's going to be their first game too, for all the same issues of figuring things out. I happen to love the Monday night. I like it. The Timbers get the national exposure again. I like national television, even though obviously I switched to radio. But I think it's good to get that exposure. I kind of. I know some people objected to that thing, wanting more traditional Saturday, and that's okay. But I like the non-traditional games. I like the night games. I like the idea of it being a big event, and that's what I'm hopeful it can be. Is like last year, it can be a big event in the city, and it's going to be a good early test. And then Dallas coming right after that, a matter of days later. We're going to find out quick what this team is made of in the early season. And as we found out last year, if you drop points early, if it takes you a while to get going, it puts you in a hole. They can't afford to be in that hole. So let's go do it and see what these guys are made of,
Well, do you want to stick around for a couple more minutes?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
That's what I said. If I'm boring, kick me out. If I'm not, hit me around. That's fine.
Well, one of the things that we wanted to talk about on this show, we got asked at the end of our show last week about sort of the other central midfield position besides Chira. Who makes sense, or what do we think about Marceline, or things like that. And so I thought maybe we could just bring that up, but also see what your opinion is, because there are sort of some different options. Yesterday, and I think maybe this was a little bit of a question I had, was whether or not Jack Dewsbury is going to be the captain this year. I think the initial feeling is that, well, yes, and he wants to be, and he was sort of trotted out yesterday after training as, here's the first guy you talk to after the coach, and he's going to kind of, have very, senior things to say, very composed interview, and as opposed to some of the other guys who were, younger and maybe their sort of first time in front of the media here. It definitely seemed set up that he is going to be the captain, and if that's so, then he's going to be in the starting lineup. I'm just curious to hear what you guys think about that. I think for me personally, I'll say what I think first, and then go from there. The Timbers, I wouldn't say they were better without Jack Dewsbury in certain games last year, but they did, to use your word, maybe overperform in games that he didn't play, whether that was due to injury or I think there was one game where he was suspended for yellow card accumulation. For example, the Galaxy game here, he didn't play in that game. A couple of other times, and the Timbers picked up points without Dewsbury in the lineup, and a lot of times it seemed like a much more fluid formation or style with Marceline set back there, because he had basically no inclination to go forward and sort of make things confusing between he and Chira. So for me, while I think Jack Dewsbury is a really important part of the team, I think if you make him the captain, you limit the sort of options that you have in terms of formation and personnel. Whereas if he's not the captain, then you can use him strategically in ways where you if you're playing on the road, you can go to a 4-5-1 and use him as another guy instead of playing two purely defensive midfielders. He can give you more assistance going forward than Marceline will. That's my take on it. But there's also other options. Alexander could possibly, he played some in the middle. We've seen Freddie Braun play in the middle, obviously just in the reserves last year in friendlies. There are some other options. So maybe you start, and what do you think about that?
I'm just a huge Marceline fan, so I'm a little biased. But I think maybe the reason that I am such a huge Marceline fan is because I like that he disrupts things and he's physical, but I really like that he comes back and gets the ball off of the defenders. And most of what he does is 1 and 2 touch. Now, I know he gives it away needlessly sometimes, but I like that. He does it with some flair. So, but that's what I like. And Jack isn't that type of player that really likes to come back and get the ball off the defenders and move it around and switch it side from side. And I don't know if that's more his playing style. I don't know if that's more what the coaches have asked him to do. They just want to get it wide and get it forward more than try to play around with it at all. But, I'm a Marceline fan for those reasons. But there's also, I think, an intriguing option with Alexander and maybe Freddie Braun, somewhere down the line. But just to echo what you said, if you make Jack the captain, it does sort of feel as though you are beholden to putting him in the starting lineup. And yeah, I don't know if I'm 100% comfortable with just sort of identifying that now and saying, well, Jack's going to be in the starting lineup, every game from here on out.
I'll start with Jack firstly. It was a fountain of youth season for him, obviously. Amazing career highs at 30 years old. His numbers tailed off towards the end of the season, kind of the hard currency, if you will, of goals and assists. Is that because he slipped a little bit, or was it because he wasn't needed as much? There's two ways looking at it. To the question of if you make him captain, do you have to start him? Perhaps. I think captain or not, he's a hugely important member of this team, a hugely important leader. I would be intrigued. I wonder if maybe he would say, I would like to be captain, want to be a leader, but you know what? If you don't think I'm an everyday guy, okay. I get the sense that Jack is a guy, he wants the best for the team. It's not about him. The one thing is, you have options. I mean, do you sit Chara deep, and do you put Nagby in front of almost as a diamond? But as we've seen, diamonds, they don't really work too well in MLS. You kind of have to have two side-to-side guys that are willing to go up and down just because of that width issue, and because, MLS teams mostly, they got big forces in the middle and maybe less on the outsides as you would see in other leagues. I like Marceline as well. The interesting thing with James Marceline, I remember when he came to Portland that first year, and it was just a disaster the first half of the season. Part of it was his acclimating. Part of it was when he was in Puerto Rico, the coach, I'm forgetting the coach's name, but he was there for 2 years, and this is when James is still kind of learning to be a player, and the coach is insistent, you get rid of the ball as soon as possible. I have to call the Tony McManus rule, which he himself will call a Tony McManus rule, is basically disrupt, win the ball, get rid of it. Don't dawdle on it. And so that's what he learned, and then he comes here, and Gavin Wilkinson, then the coach, wanted him to, be a distributor, and he was like, I don't know how to do that. I haven't done that. I think he's still kind of undoing some of those things that he learned in Puerto Rico to be a little bit more possessive. But I agree with you. He's a great physical specimen. He's good at disrupting play. I know they think very highly of what his ceiling could be. Eric Alexander, I like him on the left. I think, natural left-footed player out there. Freddie Braun, I think he's still a year away, although I love what he did last year with the reserves and in the exhibition games. I like Exactly. He's a great kid. I think that's one of those questions, though, is what is the right mix? I mean, either way, it seems like you're probably going to be relying a ton on Diego Chara. Both ends of the field. And it's a lot of running. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of responsibility. If he's up to it, I think this team can go places. If it maybe is a little bit too much, it just depends on, where's Jack at this stage in his career? Can James Marceline find that next level? Do you have to move pieces around? I think we think of the center of midfield as something that is pretty set and pretty comfortable, but I think it's not a question mark, but just a little bit of a keep it in the back of your head of just how much is going to be on Diego Chara's shoulders and can he thrive in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's getting paid the big bucks to thrive in those situations. Yeah. So that's, I don't think anybody's questioning his spot in the starting lineup, but I think for me it doesn't seem like they'll be looking or will continue to look in that position unless something amazing comes available at some amazingly low price or something, because they do seem to have the players that can make it work. It's just that the question is what combination of those players and strategically in what games do they play. I mean, we saw James play and start quite a lot. Granted it was earlier in the season, but in a couple of games when they played in the sort of 4-5-1, 4-3-3 hybrid, we saw him come in as a late substitute in a couple of home games with 1-0 leads to just shut it down and drop into a 4-5-1 and preserve the lead. And I think that was sort of instructive to see that he can come in and it may be sort of the same role, but he can do it under different circumstances, and that's really good. I just like having the option. And again, it's I don't mean to sound like I'm knocking Jewsbury, because I think he's one of the most important guys on the team and was, for the first half of the season last year, probably the most important guy on the team, not just for production, which was amazing, but for the leadership and sort of he's sort of the one guy on the field that was sort of, a real MLS veteran. And nobody else had more than maybe 4 years of MLS experience. So I think it's important to have him and in the team. And it's an interesting call because the other question is if he's not the captain, who is? And Eric Brunner was the captain in some games last year, either when Jack was hurt or I know he was a captain in, for example, the Ajax friendly. Brunner was a captain. Troy Perkins, I think, was a captain once or twice last year. And I think those would be the two natural candidates given sort of experience and the fact that they're going to be on the field without any question. I don't know if the coaches are comfortable to go in that direction. I don't know if those guys are comfortable taking on that responsibility. I don't know if a goalkeeper is the best choice for a captain. I know some people like that, some people don't. As a goalkeeper yourself, somebody who's played the position.
Very generous of you to include me in this conversation. As a goalkeeper, I can tell you about Troy Perkins.
Well, in a team where you're the goalkeeper, is there a difficulty in being the captain? You can't really necessarily run up all the way to midfield to talk to the ref about a call or have discussions, or you're not necessarily involved in the middle of the field. I think that's a lot of times why central midfielders are often captains. What's your feeling on that without going too far? Without us going down a road that may be completely nonsense.
The quick answer would be as one of the roles of a captain is just a guy that can be a liaison with the referee and get away with more barking than someone else can. And if you're a goalkeeper, it's hard to do that because you're stuck on one end of the field. That being said, most goalkeepers have to be leaders anyway. That's their job to be back there. I think Troy would do a great job with it. But I also think too Eric Brunner would be another logical candidate. I'm provided you have someone else further up the field, not just talking to the referee, but a guy that can kind of, at a stoppage of play or at a key moment, pull over a young kid and either get in his face or reassure him and have that person up there without an armband. I think you're fine having a goalkeeper, wear that band at the back.
Another topic we were going to touch on, the training center. This was one I put on there because I wanted to touch on that one just because it's taken so long to get this thing done. And I think I think it can be disruptive, and this doesn't seem disruptive. What's going on behind us? The guys show up to the stadium. They're in their locker room. They come out and train. But I don't think they want to do it on turf every day. And I don't think they want to do what they did most of last season, getting on two vans and shuttling out to Tualatin Hills and training and then shuttling back. You don't want to put your professional athletes through that. It's the start of year 2, and we still don't have that training center done yet. It's going to be a couple more months. I'd just like to see it finished so they could have that home. There's a comfort level there for your players that I think is important, and I think can help them a lot. And I'm a little surprised that it's sort of taken this long to get it done and completed the way they wanted. I know there's a lot of red tape, and they looked a lot of places to try to find an organization some space to do this, an organization they could team with perhaps to get all of this done. But I'm surprised that it's taken this long, and that recently in some articles and conversations, like even that we had Merritt on this show saying, the construction's on time, there haven't been any setbacks, but clearly there has to have been some setbacks along the way, or else it would have been done a year ago. I just really like it to be done. I'm glad that there is now an actual sort of end date, mid-April or something is when at least, that grass field might be playable or something. So it's nice to at least see that. But I'm a little disappointed that we're here and not out at a training facility.
I can't disagree with anything you're saying. I will say this, too. It's the issue of grass here. It's pouring rain today. Will be again tomorrow. This is better than being out of, to have that versatility, which they will have at the new facility. But you're right. Most MLS teams play on grass. It's a big thing, the ability to practice on grass, at least for a day or two before you're going to play a game on that surface. And the ability to have, like, when you go play at the Home Depot Center 3 times this year, and it's 175-yard width field, something like that. It'll be nice to have that versatility. As for the delays, you're right. It was kind of talked about, and then we didn't hear about it for 6 months, and here it is again. But hey, if this is your fallback option behind here,
that's not too shabby.
That's okay. And credit to Alton Hills Rec Center. Yeah, it's not ideal, but those fields were always in really good condition.
Mm-hmm.
It helped to have the 2 fields side by side, and again, as compared to other MLS teams don't have the benefit of like Dallas or Colorado do, where they've got a big complex and a ton of fields. They have to drive, half an hour to a college campus or something like that. If this is your, we'll suffer for this until the thing gets built thing, you could do worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it is a bit strange, though, the timeline, thinking that it's basically what it would have been great for last year, because they knew they were going to have the 3 away games to begin with. They weren't going to have any thing at home until April anyway. This year, there's the game in Dallas. This is the second game of the year, just I guess 5 days after the opener. That's going to be on grass. Now, it's not like they're not going to practice on grass. They'll be at Tualatin Hills, but but that'll be a nice thing to have. I mean, I think nobody would disagree with that it's a real selling point. That a first-rate facility, multiple fields. Is there an indoor field? Is that supposed to be?
No,
there's not an indoor field, right? So
they're just a turf and a grass.
Yeah. Okay. So, but then the locker rooms and training facilities and offices and all those kinds of things. That's a really good thing to have. So I think we'll all look. I mean, I know we're looking forward to going out when they have the media
little
open
media
house
day,
or something. I'm sure it'll be while I'm gone, but
probably.
And think of it this way. The Portland Trail Blazers were here in 1970. Their practice facility was built in about 2000. So it took them 30 years to get a practice facility. This is year 2 for the Timbers. It's all
they're ahead of the game.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's all relative.
Well, let's talk for a second about the new guys into camp. Obviously, yesterday, or maybe not obviously, we should say yesterday was a pretty light day, all things considered. Maybe not for the players because they had to do the beep tests and all that kind of stuff. But for everyone else, I mean, it was just sort of stretching and jogging, and it wasn't like we could come away with it and say Trincito's a beast. I mean, he looked athletic and smiled, but that was about all we could tell. But what is your opinion of those two guys, Valencia and Mosquera? And then what do you think about Brent Richards as a he's on the roster. I mean, he's not a guy who has to fight to get onto the roster. We've seen Merritt tweet before that he kind of likes him on the wing. I think his whole career he's been sort of a forward. Do you see him as a guy that has any impact at all this year, or is he sort of a
reserve player,
all-time reserve player in what could be an expand? I mean, we're sort of heard rumors of possibly an expanded reserve league and these kinds of things. Is that where you see him?
With Richards first, that's my hunch, is that we'll see him. He'll be a reserve all-star type and always be there, but he'll need some time. I mean, let's not forget, I love Brent Richards. I do. I remember that 2010 PDL championship run. His nose for goal, his leaping ability, his instincts were fantastic. And I love the homegrown player idea. I like it's a kid from Camas, and I think that's cool. I think he'll need some time. He did well at Washington, but he wasn't going to be a high draft pick. I think he'll need some seasoning, figuring out his best position maybe as part of that. That's the joy of the reserve game. You can experiment with formations and kind of see what he can do. And that's why I'm excited for the reserve games this year, to see what Brent can do, because he's one of the really intriguing parts of the roster for me. But I think that's kind of where he'll be probably in year 1. Valencia, I want to see him out on the field. It's you see a 20-year-old kid standing around doing interviews. You only get so much out of it. I want to see what he can do, and it's as ever. It's I mean, I'm thinking of when I'm 20 years old, and for me going to Eugene, to college, that was a big enough thing. And he's come from Columbia, United States, and let's not. I know it's professional sports. Let's not overlook that's not nothing. That takes some character, and it takes some time to adjust, and to the style of play, to the surface, to anything like that, because it is a lot different from Columbia. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a second half of the year type guy, where they give him the first half, he gets comfortable. Second half of the year, he's comfortable, he's found his feet, and he starts to really have the impact. Mosquera, when I saw the release, I saw 6'1", I saw defender. I go, I wonder if he's outside back. Because we're so used to 6'3", 6'4" center backs here in the U.S. But in Colombia, 6'1" is 6'4". This is a different style. He seems like he's got a good physical presence about him. It's going to be that challenge of he's going to have some tall forwards, and he's going to be expected to play a couple inches higher, because that's how the league and how the style is constructed here. But he's experienced. He knows what he's doing. Provides good depth. I think it's the same question of, if we assume Eric Bruner is kind of there, what's Footy's consistency going to be? We know he has a good ceiling. We know he can do some good things. We know he had some inconsistent moments. I know that Ross Smith just frustrated him to no end that Footy had that 0 fouls for forever, and that he's like, come on, to the center back, you got to foul. It's your job. And then David Horst being out to midseason too, it's unfortunate, but you'll push that back. I think with Mosquera, that'll be the thing. Can he adjust to just some more brute force, physical style, less technical center defending that he's going to have to do here? But they wouldn't have brought him here if they didn't think he could. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's my question. Do you think, I mean, you sort of referred to him as depth, and I don't know if that was on purpose, but do you see him as an opening day starter, or do you think that I mean, again, things will evolve over the next 6 or 7 weeks, but I mean, to me, they had to have spent some amount of money on him. It was a relatively high-profile signing. To me, that would indicate, he's going to be in the lineup right away. And if so, does that mean that it's automatically Footy that's the one that is, in the 18 instead of in the 11, or is it Brunner, or is it a fight? I mean, what do you kind of think about that?
I mean, if I had to, knowing absolutely nothing, if I had to guess, I would say it's Footy versus Mosquera to play alongside Brunner. I don't think that's a shocking thing to say. And I meant depth just in the sense of, they need a little bit more there. And even with Horst, I mean, as we've seen it, no one guy really was just like, oh my gosh, dominant, MLS best 11 type center back last year. That's which was to be expected. Brunner was let go by Columbus, and Footy was coming into MLS for the first time, and Horst was a guy that had bounced around. Never mind the issue of adjusting to a different style of play. But yeah, if I had to hunch at it, I would say Footy versus Mosquera to play alongside Brunner, unless for some reason Footy has just, he's had a renaissance and he's able to consistently be at his peak. Because I think his peak is very high.
Speaking of Footy, we should mention Jeffrey Arnold tweeted out last night. Everything we do on the show is based on Twitter.
Exactly.
And so it's either Merritt Paulson or someone else tweeting. Usually Merritt. He's spared on this one because I think he was skiing over the weekend. But Merritt had previously tweeted that, or had recently tweeted that a couple of guys, I think he said 2 were going to have green cards. What did he actually say? 2 players have received green cards. A third player is coming shortly, may get a 4th. Jeffrey Arnold suggesting that, or said he'd heard that Footy was one of them. I don't think that would be a big shock to anybody that if someone was going to get one who didn't have one, that he would be, given the amount of time he's been in the U.S., first in college, and then, this is now his 4th year with the Timbers. So that's not a particular surprise, but he said he also said that he thought Chara and Perlaza were possibilities for guys who could be getting green cards. Now, we saw Freddie Montero get a green card last year, and what was his, he basically been in the U.S. for 1 year, got a green card. That obviously helped Seattle a lot in that sense. Is that something you've heard at all? I mean, it seems fast. I don't know a lot about that process, but it seems fast for 2 guys who, I mean, especially Chara, who only got here in April, to already be on that fast track.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I mean, Footy's been here for 6 years, including college. That was kind of, but yeah, Perlaza and Chara, well, that was pretty quick. That being said, I know Gavin Wilkinson is very versed in immigration law because of the issue. Remember, there was a game in Vancouver that he had to miss when he was coach of the Timbers because he was renewing his green card, and Ron Underwood took charge, and he laughs about that to this day. So they know what they're doing with this stuff. It would be awful quick, but gosh, I mean, if you can get those kind of things, get them as quick as you can, and that obviously helps to free things up. But I've heard no specifics, but I get the sense, that probably Footy, and then hopefully soon they'll be able to make those announcements. Yeah,
and I guess the other possible options would be a guy like Khalif, or Eddie Johnson, who's been in the U.S. for a while, or Darlington Nagbe, and I'm still confused as to what his status is.
So might be. I was hoping you were going to avoid that. I was like,
I think everybody's pretty confused about that one. It wouldn't shock me if he was somebody who was getting a green card. On the other hand, it seems maybe it's a little more complicated than that with him. It's not just, he grew up in the U.S. It's not like it's a time issue. So that remains a question mark. If we could actually access our chat box and anybody knew anything about that, we could ask for it. But since we can't, send us that as an email or something, and we'll try and talk about it next week. Let's see, what else do we have on here?
Well, the coaching is kind of an interesting one too. I mean, Merritt tweeted yesterday that they were potentially looking at a possible assistant coach, someone that people might be familiar with. We saw Cameron Knowles out there.
Yeah, I'm looking right now to see if I see him.
And we're told that he was just helping out.
So we didn't know if that down here somewhere.
Is the connection.
You need your binoculars from up here. They all look the same.
Yeah, but interesting. I guess maybe start with your thoughts on Trevor James leaving. We haven't heard. I don't know if it was just I didn't want to ask yesterday. I felt like maybe that wouldn't be the right way to go, but certainly maybe ask here in the next day or two. But what happened there with Trevor James leaving? And, there's been a couple of other coaching changes as well.
The sense I got with Trevor was just kind of one of those things where you do it for a year, like, okay, maybe it's not the best fit, and
Right.
kind of mutually say, why don't we just, we'll go and figure it out. And, I know John Spencer wants, a guy, it's a number 2 guy who, it was interesting last year of the training sessions. It would normally be, when they split up into kind of the starting group and the reserve group to practice, it would be Spencer and Trevor kind of running with the starter group, and it was Trevor's job to kind of, be a yin-yang thing with Spencer and be that number 2 and be that sounding board and be that guy. Well, what about this kind of whereas Amos would then run the other. That was Amos's job with Gavin. It was Amos's job to be the check on Gavin's eccentricities. What's the word I'm looking for? You know what I mean? To kind of be that one, to be a little more calm, a little
Right.
more cerebral, and to do that. As far as the coaching, we'll see. I know that theoretically, if you wanted to, if Amos is there, he's been around for a while, he's done a very good job. If indeed it is Cameron Knowles, I like Cameron a lot. I think he's a guy that's been done a lot of youth coaching in Portland. But the big thing is, can John Spencer find someone who he trusts and who he respects, that he can have there and kind of be an important guy who can just kind of ping ideas off? Can you have someone then as that next spot who is going to be working with the younger players, can develop them, potentially in charge of a lot of the college scouting, things like that? Mike Toshak down here as well as a new goalkeeper coach, and most of that is man management, I think, with Troy Perkins, and then it's a little bit of technique and growing and learning with Jake Galisa. I know they're very, very high on him, so we'll kind of see what the choice is to figure out the rest of assistant coaching.
Yeah, and Merritt told us on this show that that Toshak would have a little bit more of a role than just goalkeeping, that he would be a little bit more of a general assistant coach and aid in that. And we've seen Cameron Knowles around this MLS Timbers team, and we know he's a former Timbers player, of course, but basically apart from when he was in Montreal for the end of last season, he's been in here, he's been at practices, he's been at training sessions, usually training, not coaching, but he's familiar with these players. It wouldn't be bringing back some, other former Timbers player who hasn't been around the team at all. He's been plugged in, so.
And it shows you, too, how highly John Spencer and Merritt and Gavin respect Cameron, that they let him come back and train. He was just trying to get fit, and he was here for a long time training. And that I think speaks volumes to what they think of him as a person, as a soccer player, and maybe is the biggest indication of what they might think of him to bring him on staff potentially.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that, and I think we talked about this before, that I don't think they have to be in any rush. I mean, they've got some talented coaches down there. You can even throw, Rylette into the mix. Don't forget that he's out there, But that group of guys that are down there have an impressive resume and pretty well thought of. So I don't think it's, the end of the world or anything, that they're still kind of sorting things out, trying to find somebody.
Well, I think we're probably, let's see, where are we? Yeah, we're going to be out of time, even though we started late. Sorry, you get a short show this week. Technical difficulties again, but we'll keep working on getting those sorted out. Thanks, John, very much for joining
Thanks
us.
for having
me.
We appreciate it, and we'll be seeing you a bunch, but hopefully have you on the show again before too long. Otherwise, we're going to go out and we're probably the lucky ones standing in here, even though it's cold in here. It is
We're going to
dry.
go out and stand in the rain? What?
Yeah.
We'll go and catch up with everybody outside. So until next week, I'm Mal.
And I'm Kelly.
And we'll talk to you then.
See you next week.